All right. Should be. I hate always opening this way, but I think we're live now because YouTube is just ridiculous when it comes to the delay between the stream starting. So it always seems like it opens up with a couple of seconds of silence at least. But anyway, welcome back once again to the most depressing podcast on the internet. It's been a little while, and to be honest, I don't really have much of a show planned. I kind of just was going to come on here and ramble about whatever came to mind. Going to wait a little bit just to see how many people start to pour in before we get started. So, a typical stream. As usual, I haven't scheduled this properly, so just kind of going in on a whim. I realize this isn't exactly prime broadcasting time, but I was out for a walk this morning, about an hour or two ago, and I had some things on my mind. And it always sounds better in your head. You know, I kind of play out what I want to say. I kind of have these, it's going to sound a little mental, but I guess I sort of have these conversations in my head. Not necessarily a conversation, but it's sort of an inner monologue of like, okay, this is what I'm thinking about, and kind of expound upon the ideas in my mind. And it always feels as though when I say it in my mind, it sounds a lot better than when I can finally get to a place where I can express it. It used to be that way with writing, to the point where, you know, I'd be walking around or at work or something like that, and, you know, the perfect line of whatever I wanted to write would come to mind. And then if I didn't write it down at some point then and there, I'd, you know, get home later on and I'd forget it, and I'd be pissed at myself because I would remember some variation of what it was that I wanted to write, but it would never be the original line that I had in my mind the first time around. So what I learned to do was, you know, I learned to always have some sort of way to write something down with me. At first it was a notepad, you know, piece of paper, pen. Then it got to be, when cell phones got better, you know, you have the memo pad you could just text a message into and save it for later. So I found ways to work around that. But, you know, when I was out for a walk, it's a little different. Can't really do much. I guess I could voice record something if I wanted to. But if it comes into the type of situation where, you know, it's something I want to say on a live stream, you kind of have to go from memory, because I can't sit here and play a voice recording or something. That's just silly. So this stream is going to be a little bit meta at times, I guess. You know, there's no real drama here going on or anything like that. There's no real YouTube topics or anything, but I suppose it's going to sort of get into that type of thing eventually, because I've been doing a lot of, you know, self-reflection, as I often do. And, you know, I think I do it to the point of being overly critical of myself, because sometimes I'll kind of psych myself out of doing things. You know, even streaming. It's been a while since I've done one of these shows, and, you know, think, oh, you know, I don't really have the content. I want to stream, but I'm not sure that I have something that I can really do for, you know, about an hour or whatever. So what I tend to do is I tend to wait and collect a couple of topics that I can just come in and sort of springboard off of. And I think I've sort of done myself a bit of a disservice in that regard, because not that I feel as though I leech off of, you know, other content, but I sort of forget sometimes that I don't necessarily need something else to springboard a discussion for me. You know, I have my own ideas on things, I have my own opinions, and while sometimes it's helpful to have that initial thing that you can point to and say like, oh, you know what, I've got something to say about that, and it sort of goes into other stuff that you want to talk about as a result, it's a good way, it's a good fire starter. But in a sense, if you rely on that too much, you tend to become a little bit dependent on it, and you sort of start to forget that, you know, you have your own creativity, you have your own mind, and even if something is not necessarily relevant at the time, you know, I can just come out here and I can put out a video talking about whatever I want. I can get on a stream and talk about whatever I want. And I know sometimes that sort of thing doesn't interest as many people as when there is some sort of hot button issue going on. But that's okay to me, because I've never really been about trying to simply draw in a crowd for the sake of drama. You know, if I talk about an issue, it's because I have something that I really want to say about it. And, you know, like I said, I had a lot on my mind when I was out there today, and yet now that I'm here, it's never quite the same as when you originally think about it. I should probably turn on the live chat. I realized I didn't have live chat on. So I see some people have come in. Welcome to the stream, guys. Appreciate any viewership. If this turns out to be a bust, you know, maybe I'll privatize it or something. I don't know. But I think it's going all right so far. It got a little self-indulgent, but I sort of do want to branch out from here. And I've been thinking about the way that people, and on social media specifically, it seems as though life has become, at least on the online sphere, one big contest of having to always broadcast how good of a person you are at all times. And if for some reason you are not somebody that's broadcasting that constantly, it somehow means that you're not a good person. And that just, it kind of irks me, because you don't need to share every little good thing you do in the world in order to be a good person. I feel as though for people that don't want to, or claim to not want to buy into narratives, they're certainly willing to blindly accept the way that people portray themselves online. If somebody's ranting and, you know, oh, I'm morally superior because I do this and I believe this, that somehow automatically makes them a good person. And that's just simply not how reality works. It sort of amazes me that we've come to this point where virtue signaling is how we decide whether somebody is a good person or not. But when I see virtue signaling, what I feel like is, okay, what has this person done in their life that they are overcompensating for to make up for? Because it always seems as though the people that do it the hardest have the most skeletons in their closet. And they're working so hard to get this validation from the public that they can get pats on the back. Oh, you know, you're so good, you're so woke, you're so wonderful, you know, you're progressive, you're doing wonderful things for the world, you're raising awareness for these issues, and I can't stand it. And the reason I can't stand it, let's take Twitter, for example. When somebody goes on some sort of virtue signaling rant and they put somebody else down in their post and they say this person is problematic because X, they should be doing Y instead, and say that post blows up and it starts getting a lot of likes, a lot of retweets, you almost always find at the bottom of the thread a link to something for their own personal benefit. And you see this a lot with tragedies as well. Somebody will, quote unquote, raise awareness for some sort of tragedy that has befallen somebody else. They'll take that tragedy, they'll use it to push their agenda, and then they'll one-up it. They'll up their game, and they'll try to use that tragedy to benefit themselves. Here's a link to my Patreon. Here's a link to my PayPal. Here's a link to my GoFundMe. Fuck you. You can't be a good person if the only reason that you are broadcasting the good things that you do is so that you can draw attention to something that you want, so that you can get financial gain out of it. And now some may argue that by saying this, I'm sort of humble bragging, but that's not the case. What I'm trying to do here is set a foundation for where I'm coming from. So behind the scenes, I'll do good things for people. I'll help people out. but you won't see me really broadcasting it. Now, I'm not saying that makes me an automatically superior person, you know, but it makes me feel as though when I see somebody else broadcast their actions, that they just have to have somebody know about it, it makes me question the intent of their motives. And more often than not, like I said, you'll see a situation where the person is coming in and trying to utilize that tragedy or that brag to draw attention to something that they want to benefit from for themselves. And that bothers me because I don't like the way people sort of buy into that, pat them on the back, and somehow believe that these people are entirely altruistic and doing good things all the time. I don't know, if I do good shit and people want to support that, what's wrong with that? I have to tell them about all the good shit I do so they can decide if they want to support me. Look, it depends what it is. It depends how you present it, you know? I don't think there's something inherently wrong with it. You know, for example, I kind of want to get into more, and I've wanted to do this for a while, I just haven't really found a way to garner the type of audience that would be receptive to it. But I've always been interested in sort of, you know, giving sort of advice, helping people out with their personal problems. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's 100% altruistic, because doing good things for somebody, you know, it makes you feel good to an extent. So I enjoy that type of thing. And I'd like to do streams with people that want to talk about their issues, or if, you know, maybe if they're in a hard time in their life or whatever. So there is a use for that kind of thing. Right, actions speak louder than words. I agree. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. If you're doing good things, people will see you're doing good things. How many times have you been Star Tropics? Beat Star Tropics? I've never beat Star Tropics. I've played it very little. I don't own the game, so that was... Growing up, I didn't own it. I heard about it. I wasn't able to own a copy. Where did Star Tropics come to mind, just out of curiosity? That seems a bit random. I mean, what kind of... Duncan, what kind of support are you talking about, I suppose I would ask? Because my problem is with a very specific kind. You know, like I tried to explain, where you'll have these sort of things where someone will take a tragedy, or they will put another person down, and then they will use that to just kind of advertise whatever they want. Ninja Gaiden. Oh, Ninja Gaiden probably once. That game is ridiculously hard. Yeah, I'm into the old school games. I like those things. That's my favorite era. You know, Nintendo and Super Nintendo are probably, or definitely, some of my favorite systems that have some of my favorite games. So that's definitely what I'm into. Monetary, of course. I think your issue is more with people who get duped than the dupers, but I may be wrong. Yeah, you know, you're kind of onto something. It's sort of like this sort of goes into another thing that I guess I'm not too big on. The live streamers, the so-called titty streamers, if you will. I don't use that term. It's just a term that I know people understand. So when you have these women that give this air of availability to their audience in hopes that, you know, these desperate, lonely guys have a girl that's going to pay attention to them for a couple of bucks or a couple $100 or even a couple of $1,000. I think my issue is more with the people that fall for it than the person taking advantage of it. Because, you know, they're, at the end of the day, as much as I dislike it, they're trying to make a living. But it bothers me that people will just basically basically throw money away to someone that's just like, hi, I exist. By extension of my birth, I don't have to put out any ideas, any, interesting conversation even out to the public. I just exist. I'm pretty. Give me money. It's a little strange to me. The concept has always been a little bit weird to me. I know a lot of people disagree with that. I know a lot of people think that you have to, regardless of what the person is doing, you have to respect the hustle, as they say, which is another saying that I can't stand. I don't agree. I don't have to respect everything. I reserve my respect for things that I deem respectable. Now, people can agree or disagree on what I find respectable, but you're not going to force me to respect you. I don't care. So the Swedish model for Twitty streamers. Thoughts? White Sharia now. Look, I'm not saying people have to cover themselves up or anything like that. I just think it doesn't require any sort of depth. And I'm more interested by content of character than just appearances, because you can be a very attractive person and be empty inside, be devoid of anything interesting. Likely bothers you because you value whatever you do for work or what your parents did for work, and seeing people... Well, look, I mean, there's always a bit of a personal aspect in there. You can't... It's dishonest to say that there's absolutely none. So, yeah, I think when you're somebody that, tries your best at different things and you feel as though those things are valuable, or at least that you attempt to do something valuable that will actually, contribute something to the world, I find that, and I don't think it's healthy to do, but sometimes you will see things like that and you'll be like, man, what am I doing wrong? Because that's just insane that somebody can basically sit there and, just have it pour in with what looks like no effort. It's like low-level humiliation porn. So, all right. On that note, the reason why I don't think that the streaming crowd like that is a respectable thing, it's because I feel as though at a certain point, you basically just allow yourself to become a puppet to the people. You don't really... It's not genuine at some point. It becomes a complete business model, and you kind of just do things for the money and nothing else. Now, I'm not saying everybody that makes money off of these kind of things is like that, because I don't think that's true. I think there's a specific subset of people that kind of just play into the crowd. For example, there was a streamer at one point that had an entirely different camera set up, and when she would get a donation, she would go over to the other camera and do jumping jacks, as many jumping jacks based on, whatever price the person paid. And it's like, you're just a clown. You're a jester. I personally think that that's embarrassing. I don't see what's respectable about it. I can't watch it because I feel as though I cringe for the person on their behalf. I can't get behind it. I don't see what the value is. I don't understand why people... Well, okay. That's sort of a... Me saying I don't understand is sort of a lie. I kind of do understand it. You have these men, and maybe they are, maybe they're lonely, maybe, maybe they're looking for a sense of control, and when they see these women that are willing to act on their behalf for money, they'll pay them. And they'll get to see somebody, because you could easily just go and say to these guys, well, why are you guys paying for this? You could just go to some Google, you could go search something up on Google and see women all day long if that's what you really want to do for free. And you're right. But I think what that lacks is the aspect of control, the direct connection, knowing that you contributed something to this person, and now because of you, they're taking this action. So there's that sort of connection to it. Now look, I don't personally get anything out of that, but I think that's what goes on there. Thing is that people like Momo-kun make $15,000 a month on Patreon, but can sexually harass people at conventions and get away with it. Yeah, I don't like her. I've never liked her, even before this stuff came out. And I'm amazed that people give someone like her money to dress up as characters and whatnot, because she's not even anything to look at. You know, if you go, especially if you see her recent videos where she's not all made up, you're like, whoa, that's what's under those 6 pounds of makeup. It's amazing. I mean, look, I don't think she's anything even when she has a bunch of makeup on, but it's even worse without, if that's possible. Ran a popular Twitter account when Internet Bloodsports was going strong. Almost every IBS host I spoke to through that account just seemed like they were normal people, mostly. What happened? Who were you? I may have seen your account. Did you have the same username, or was it something different? Yeah, the IBS scene has sort of died down a little bit there. I know Kumite is sort of making a comeback, but it's definitely not as big as it was. The fans were the ones that disappointed me. The rabid, blind, and would go find the next best clown show without any care for the morality of the hosts. Yeah, you know, I feel like it gets to a point where sometimes you'll do things to please the crowd, and that's not... I understand why it's done. You know, you do what gets you the money. You do what gets you the viewers. And I'm not saying you can never do both, like care about what you do and also bring in viewers. But for me personally, I find that there's a limitation for what I am willing to do to draw in a crowd. And my line is, if it's something that I have no interest in, or no idea that I think is valuable that I can contribute to it, I'm not going to do it. Even if it's a hot button issue, even if it's something everybody's pointing to, like, oh, you should talk about this, you should do this. I can't do it. I can't do it because it comes off as disingenuous to me. I can't fake interest. I'm not good at that, and that's probably why I'll never really, you know, reach a super level of success on some type of platform like this. And I've come to accept that it's not about... I ran BNN. Oh, I know your account. I used to follow it. I actually liked that account. It was pretty funny. Yeah, so I guess for me, you know, I've accepted that. It's not that I've ever been in it for fame. It would be cool, of course. You know, I like the fact that my audience has grown now. I appreciate everybody that comes out and, you know, interacts and supports in any way. I don't ever want anybody to think that I take something like that for granted, because it means a lot to me. But there's just certain things where it's like, no, I can't really do it. It's not for me. It's not my interest. Even if it's something that I know people are going to be into. Because, you know, you'll notice that there's some YouTube channels, and I'm not going to make the argument, oh, they're just doing it for views by any means, but they tend to focus on the hot button topics, like with what's going on in the so-called YouTube community. You'll see, like, they'll do videos on people like FouseyTube or whatever. It's like, I just have no interest in that sphere of people. Ralph's first stream on this channel was epic. Yeah, that was pretty good. That was fun. It's kind of funny because I looked back and I realized they only did 3 streams on this channel, but for some reason it felt like a lot more. And I think part of that was just because, you know, so much shit happened in those 3 nights that it felt like an entire week. Ralph does a good job of carrying a good variation of IBS. Yeah, I like his show, and I liked it way back when it was just a very small stream, because, you know, they did a variety of stuff. Even if it was stuff I wasn't necessarily interested in, you know, their commentary, their humor, that was appealing. So But even they cover a lot of things that sometimes don't really interest me. You know, I'm not much of a politics guy, as much as sometimes that kind of crosses over into what I'm talking about, and that's sort of just because of the social climate. But me, I'm not really a politics guy. I don't like political debates. I don't like you know, arguing about policy and all that kind of stuff. I'm not as educated on most of the topics as I could be. And the reason for that is, you know, not because I couldn't learn about it if I wanted to. It's just a lack of interest. You know, I focus my energy elsewhere. I try to do more things that I enjoy than I don't enjoy, because there's a lot of stuff out there on social media and on the internet that's a big downer, and there's enough of that in the world. Worski/JF feels like it was a decade ago. Yeah, that was a long time ago too. I love live streamers, but every time I check the trending tab, I'm like, what the fuck for you? What is this? 9K people are watching this trash. Yeah, the IRL streams are they're an interesting breed of I don't know if you're specifically referring to the IRL ones, but the way that there was sort of a crossover with the internet blood sports thing with people like Corinne and stuff like that, it amazes me how so many people are interested in that. But I guess I sort of understand the appeal. It's like watching a train wreck. You know, you get to see somebody that is entertaining by extension of their own stupidity. I can't listen to her for a long time. I swear I lost brain cells, really lost brain cells listening to her for such an extended period of time. Your boogie video is great. Maybe you could continue digging into similar personalities and their fan bases. You know, I don't mind doing that once in a while. Again, the reason why I did that boogie one and why I feel like it came across as strong as it did, you know, not to toot my own horn, but I think it was one of my better ones on a personal level. The reason why is because it resonated with me personally. I don't like seeing people kind of, even if it's not on purpose, you know, and we can still maybe give them the benefit of the doubt here, I still don't like people that use that sort of mental health card. And then when you get people in your fucking comment section that's saying just because you disagree with them, you don't understand mental health issues, it's like, motherfucker, what do you know about my personal life? Just because I don't broadcast it all over the internet means it doesn't exist? You have to come up with a better argument than that. I mean, if there's no proof for the fact that I don't understand, and if you go somewhere through my videos, there's a specific video where I talk about mental health issues, and it gets a little bit personal, but you'd have to do a little bit of research to realize that, wouldn't you? Let's see. IRL music kittens. Oh, I'm banned from the kitten live stream for using all caps. Seriously, try it. You'll get banned within 5 minutes. Wow, that's messed up. Yeah, so, Duncan, if there is another instance where I see a figure like that and, you know, I've got something to say on the matter, then I'll make a video on it. That's, you know, like I said, that's part of my problem when it comes to making consistent content, and that's why I've kind of decided to try to just do these streams more often and put out ideas even if it's not relevant to something that's going on with the community. Because take, for example, the social justice crowd and the way that they treat media and, you know, comics and video games, cartoons, books, things like that. They're always people that try to destroy. They never create. And even when they create, they take an established idea and warp it to fit their narrative. And I was thinking, you know, that's just not something that I ever personally want to be myself. I like to create. I like to put things out into the world that I think about and that I believe in, and I want to do more of that. And, you know, I'm sure on some level that's not going to interest some people that came here, and that's okay. But I don't want to just be waiting for social issues to come up in order to have some sort of content. And I think part of the reason why I do that is just kind of second guessing myself and thinking, you know, maybe it's not as interesting. Or I guess what I don't do is I don't think of myself as this person that people need to listen to or need to care about the opinions of. It's like, if you like it, if you want to disagree, if you want to talk about something that I've said, if something that I've said resonates with you, that's awesome, but I don't expect it. I just kind of do my own thing, you know? So I like how SJWs hate cultural appropriation when all they do is plant their flags. Yeah, I've pointed that out on multiple occasions, most recently with anime, with Crunchyroll, and they did like an LGBT panel, and people were like, oh, so maybe they're talking about LGBT focused anime series. And like, all right, as much as I can't stand the acronym, you know, being thrown in there, I think they should use the Yuri, Yaoi, or whatever labels, because that's relevant to the genre. People thought that it would be about that type of stuff, and what it turned out to be is exactly what I thought it was. People on the panel talking about their so-called personal experience being an anime fan as a gay person. It's like, who gives a fuck? Who are you? It doesn't make sense. Why care about that? I mean, there's nothing preventing you from watching a series just because your race, your sexual orientation, or anything like that. You can be into those things. Welcome to the stream. I don't know if you've tried to say anything, but I can't hear anything. If you're interested, it will show. If you're not, you'll end up like Mundane Matt. Yep. That's how I feel about it, and that's why I don't just jump in for hot button topics, because even when I'm making something, if I get started on something and I'm like, turns out my heart's not really in this, I'll just scrap it. It'll never go up. They're ugly thought mobs. But yeah, my thing is, I think that it kind of goes back to this whole good person thing. I think that you have to act as you wish to see others act. You have to live by your ideals if you wish to see others kind of catch on to your ideals and live in that way. You can't just sit around and be a shit person and demand everybody else change. And I think that's what a lot of these types of people do. And that's why they don't put out anything that is creative, because they're too busy they're too busy tearing down and trying to co-opt things that other people have created. And I think that, leading by example, as cliche as it may be, is the way to go. Because, like I said, if you're not willing to live up to your own standards, you can't expect other people to live up to your own standards. If your ideology is full of contradictions, where your rules conflict with each other depending on when it's convenient, nobody is going to take you seriously, and rightfully so. You have to have a strong foundation for which you build your ideas upon, or else they're going to crumble at the first sign of challenge. And so, I'm not going to say I'm always right, but at the very least, I do try to formulate an opinion, an argument, a strong foundation for that belief, whether you want to say that it's based in fact or not, and then go from there. Hold yourself to the standards you hold others to. Exactly. You can't expect people to act the way you want them to if you're not even willing to act that way.
What's going on?
Standards. Hypocritical standards. Like, for example, you tell somebody, Don't dehumanize people, and then you turn around and do it to people you don't like. Like you can't demand people live by a standard if that's what you're out there doing whenever it's convenient.
So just another Wednesday then.
Yeah. So, and that sort of goes into, all right, so using the social media stuff, that situation recently with the guy that stole the MAGA hat from the teenagers, okay? There was a GoFundMe up for that where, you know, I think it was his mom maybe tried to put it up. I'm not entirely sure who did it, but somebody tried to put up a GoFundMe for the guy. They were trying to raise some ridiculous amount of money, like $80K. It got taken down, and rightfully so. But prior to that, people were spreading it around, actually trying to get the guy help. And so I came across a GoFundMe, and it was for some poor kid's cat that needed, you know, like a surgery desperately. And I'm just reading this. I'm like, oh my God, this is the most depressing thing I've read today. And I've thought to myself, you know what? You see these people always using tragedy to prop themselves up. You see them always taking advantage of social clout on a thread. And so what I did was I took that GoFundMe and I linked it in the thread for that guy's GoFundMe. And I was like, you know what? If you guys want to throw money away, you might as well throw money at something that's actually going to help somebody out. And because trash like that guy, he doesn't deserve the help. And, you know, you could say, oh, well, maybe you're valuing the life of a cat more than you are the human being. But you know what? He clearly doesn't value other human beings. He's, you know, based on an implied belief. So, fuck that guy. If you dehumanize people, then you kind of revoke your right to have other people respect your humanity.
But they need their respect. Now they don't need to respect you. That's when you have to earn it. But they demand that you respect them without them ever earning anything.
See, that's what bothers me. You know, you know, I've talked about this before because it was in that stupid Reddit thread, but I don't think you automatically respect someone upon meeting them. It's like, I forgot the term that I used for it, but you sort of approach a person with like a neutral curiosity. It's like, okay, you can respect the fact that they are a human being, and so you're not going to just jump into the situation instantly putting them down or trashing on them. But you don't know them well enough to know that they are a respectable person. And I don't think that that's wrong. I think that's just normal, whether people want to admit that that's what happens or not. Hey man, I subbed for the kill stream, but I liked your chilled social commentary. Thank you, I appreciate that. Why do people feel they should automatically respect them? I think it's just entitlement.
Wasn't there a Reddit argument or something to that effect that you got into where somebody or where they were downvoting you because you said respect needs to be earned?
Yeah, they were like, that's what assholes usually say to excuse their mistreatment of people. It's like, no, you don't have to like prop somebody up as a respectable person when you first encounter them in order to not be an asshole. I think I explained my point pretty well there. I definitely explained it better than I have here because, you know, I had time to think and write it out. But like I said, you know, you approach a person as a human, of course, because that's what they are, and you get to know them little by little. Respect is built upon reputation. You know, if you have a bad reputation, regardless of whether that is warranted or not, I mean, that's an entirely different argument. That's how people are going to treat you. You know, if everybody thinks you're a shit person, for example, Trump, you got a lot of people shitting on him. They think he's a bad person. They treat him like a bad person, whether or not he actually deserves any respect or not.
Right. But I think in a situation like that, much like any other one I've seen lately, that they are being fed views and they don't even realize that that's what's happening.
Yeah, I mean that's true. That's a very specific situation, I suppose, and it's on a much larger scale than if you're just an ordinary person. But even with things like social media, you'll get people that make snap decisions and they don't approach you as a human being. I mean, there was that recent example where the guy just like he saw blocked in my in my bio and just assumed, oh, he's not approaching me in good faith, so I'm just going to call him clueless right from the get-go and then accuse him of not approaching in good faith. It's like that's not how this works at all. If you are the first one to drop an insult, you're the one that's not approaching in good faith. I'm all for insults. I like them. I use them. They're good sometimes. But don't demand this, oh, you can't say anything to me, but I can say whatever I want to you. That drives me up the wall. That was the thing that drove me up the wall with that the game philosopher commentary where he's like, you just insulted me because you have no argument. Even though I put an argument under that, and in his opening comment, he put an insult. It's like, I don't care if you insult me, but then the gloves are off. Then it's like, I'm going to give you the same treatment that you're giving to me. There's no special treatment here.
Yeah, I do hate when they when they are the ones, they're the aggressors. They come after you, they drop these complaints, and then you reply in kind, and they say, oh, well, now you're resorting to insults. So that means you have no argument.
Or you're just angry.
Yeah. And the whole trying to assess somebody's mental state, some stranger on the internet's mental state, is obvious. It's obviously just a deflection tactic. I mean, that's all any of these are. It's like, oh, well, they see somebody else do it. They don't bother to pay attention to when they do it. They just observed, oh, well, somebody else saw that person was getting mad in the argument, so they called it out. They called that out, and then either that into the conversation or something else changed, and so they figure, well, I can do the same. They don't actually sit there and think, well, I need to make sure I'm not angry first, because what will inevitably happen anyway, this happens in real life conversations I've been in, where you'll then go and say, well, you started it and you were being angry first. Well, I wasn't being angry. Maybe you just need to understand better how I operate. Like, okay, buddy, sure. Yeah, you weren't angry, even though you were just yelling here, and I simply just don't understand your emotional status. Well, if you can sound angry, but apparently not be angry, that probably says you're not a very stable person.
So that brings me to another point on that note, which is the very people that usually try to say, oh, you're just angry or whatever, are the ones that will come along and be like, when they're pissed off at something, my anger is righteous, my anger is just because it's, aimed at injustice. And it's like, so what you're saying is, I'm going to Kathy Newman them here, is that anger doesn't automatically make you incorrect. Because that's how I feel. It's like, yes, being angry, being overly emotional, that can cloud your judgment, but it doesn't automatically make you wrong.
Yeah, I mean, some groups of these people love to always resort to citing fallacies that they haven't proven. And this is a prime example of an actual fallacious argument. Like, what does being upset have to do with whether or not somebody's argument is correct?
Right. It's just like you said, it's a deflection from the main point, and usually because they don't have a response to the main point. And that's sort of why I've kind of I know I've still gotten into a few scuffles, but just try not to really get into these long-winded online arguments, because people, they're not in it to learn anything. They're not in it to think, well, maybe something I've said here is not correct and maybe I have to rethink what I've said. They're just in it to kind of win the clout, to be correct for the audience. And
yeah, they want the high fives, the likes, the retweets, all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm not for that behavior. I mean, I guess to some degree you could say that I make posts on Twitter, and you could probably boil it down and argue and say, okay, well, that's sort of the same thing. But I at least, if it's not something that's just a dumb joke, I at least try to explain, where I'm coming from on the issue.
I have to say though that social proof is the worst kind of proof. It's that's a term I heard a lot when I was when I was doing something different with my business. And it's one of those things where you look at and you say, well, yeah, social proof is a great tool for marketing, because if somebody else can go and basically endorse what you say, then that means you have some legitimacy. But the worst thing is to rely on the public to determine what's legitimate and what's not. People buy into stupid stuff all the time. I was just thinking about it because I'm not a sports guy, but there was a relatively large event in professional basketball, or trade in professional basketball today, and some people were breaking down like the numbers. They were breaking down kind of the logical aspect of it. You had one guy who was making a big deal about not wanting to play for a team anymore, and he wanted to go to another team. And if he had stayed with the team he was on, he could have gotten, I don't know, around $200 million or something like that. But now, because he got traded and he got moved to a different team, the most he can ever expect to make is like 140 or 150 million. And so it's and then there was another guy who the other guy that was affected by that trade. He was making these cryptic, I guess, Instagram posts where he was like, oh, you can't trust this the people in this business or anything like that. And I just remember just reading it and thinking, how naive do you have to think that in a business situation, even if they tell you we're not going to trade you, or we're not, or something more close, that probably hits closer to home for a lot of other people, not saying been laid off, but let's just say if you a company gets acquired, or a company or work at gets bought out by somebody else, the first thing you usually hear when they have these meetings is nobody's going to lose their job.
Right.
And this is the same thing. You're not going to get traded, but when you wave enough money, anybody's willing to change their position on things. And so it's like you got these people who are making millions of dollars and they have no business sense. So, but they make millions of dollars because we've determined that professional sporting is an entertainment that is worth that amount.
Right.
So
yeah, and I guess you could argue ethics is a problem when it comes to greed and capitalism. As as decent as a system, it still has its flaws, of course.
Yeah, I think those flaws are based on humanity. That's why when I hear libertarians and anarcho-capitalists, I'm not 100% with what they say, because they operate under the auspices that you will be punished for being greedy.
Sort of like an idealized, yeah. I mean, that's not entirely true. I guess some people pay for it, but there's a lot of greedy people that remain on top of the
similarly with socialism and communism, they think, oh well, this will fix the problem of greed. Well, no, now you just ensured that the worst people to entrust morality and ethical behavior to are now have the say so.
So this YouTube, okay,
press F.
There we go. I think we should be back on the air. Okay, we're back. I don't know what happened there, but to finish what I said, I don't think it's something that I'm completely above, but I try to remain cognizant of those things. Like if I feel as though I'm spending a little bit too much time here on Twitter talking to morons, I'll back off for a while. I'll be like, all right, I gotta stop this. This is fucking stupid. There's no point, nobody's changing their minds. I'm not getting anything of value out of it. I'm just getting pissed off. It's time to step back and take a little break. And that's why I've kind of been trying to do, step back, do streams. I don't know how many people here are interested in gaming, but I've been spending more time on Twitch. And that sort of fills in my time between YouTube content as far as streaming goes. Yeah, I guess we are back. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. A little blip in the connection. Luckily, my internet didn't go out because lately, even though it's summer and the weather is absolutely fine, there's been these periods of time where the internet will go out for like 10 to 15 minutes at a time at random with no indication of why. It's just good old Spectrum for anybody that's familiar with them.
Just use Google Fiber. That'll be better.
I don't even think that's an
That
option here.
It's not. It's not here either. It is in certain areas, but they're not. This is kind of one of those things where I get really skeptical because I believe in the case of, not to totally detract, but on the subject of greed anyway,
Sure.
they were saying, oh well, we're going to our focus is going to be serving the underserved neighborhoods. The more
Yeah, but
working
I
class
mean, is
and
everybody in that neighborhood going to be able to afford it? Are they going to offer reasonable service?
so here's why I have an issue with it. There are two ways that can go. Either they'll make it so that it's affordable to them or free. And so and so they'll do that as a way, as a gesture to say, well, see, look at how ethical and moral we are. Really, Google, the same company that wants to have all the world's data, is ethical. Nobody sees the potential problems with that. If they sucker in all these people, they're going to think, the people who aren't poor are going to think, oh wow, Google sure really cares about people and they're really doing things to help out in the community. Either it's a tax incentive, or there's greed, or both. So you have a potential tax incentive for doing that, and you get the poor people in, and the poor people I don't have data on this, I'm not sure, but I suspect that they probably don't understand the technology in business as well well enough to understand that you don't want to give all your information to a company that its sole goal is to have all of your information.
Right.
If you care about privacy. Now nowadays people are like, well, I don't care, as long as I get whatever thing that doesn't matter that I want. And then you get the other people, the wealthier or more affluent people, who buy into this, saying that Google's doing a great thing. Now they're saying, oh well, now I really want to use these guys, and now they've come up with this ploy to basically get everybody's information, and what they do with it, nobody knows. And by the time that the consequences, or they realize the consequences, it's too late.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the idea of all that stuff, but unfortunately, it's probably a little bit too late for me personally, so I'm screwed on that deal. But I do try to, as fruitless as it may be by now, I do try to limit where I give out information. And I do have to say that, to your point about this, I do find it interesting when people want to, blindly believe that a company's move is just like pure altruism. It's like, yeah, okay, so there are some companies that do some good things, but there is a profit motive here. It's not 100% we want to do good things.
Right. Now there is something interesting that I'm sure the average person in the U.S. at least hasn't heard about. But from a tax perspective, there are different types of corporation status or types that you can have, like an S corp and C corp. Well, they have a B corp too, which is a public benefit corporation. So before somebody gets the wrong impression, this is not a nonprofit organization that is trying to do good. This is a for-profit business whose mission allegedly is to do some kind of public good or public benefit. And by trying to be this type of corporation, there are potentially so many other things you can get. Now, there's probably, to an extent, there are people that I know, at least personally, that do care to an extent, but but I feel like it's superficial. It's to the extent where they can say, well, I consider what I'm doing to be a public benefit, whether or not it is, that takes some more time to really understand. But I feel it's a public benefit, and so I think that I'm doing something good.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I think some people maybe get the wrong impression when you say these kind of things. It's like, I don't think that people shouldn't try to do good. it's just my position is that just because you try to do good, it doesn't mean what you're doing is actually good. Those two things seem to get easily conflated. You know, for example, our famous favorite shoe on head quote, "I just want people to think I'm a good person." It's like, oh, you just want people to think that you're a good person. It doesn't matter if you actually are. Now you could argue, okay, that's poor wording on her part, but it seems a little strange.
Right. I do think in a situation like that, it may, be poor wording, but it's exactly what it's the truth.
Right. Well,
I mean, poor wording. It's poor wording in the sense that after the fact, she might think, that's going to give an impression I don't want people to have.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, that's exactly how people are. It's not that they want to be good; it's that they want to be seen as good. And in these types of situations, you know, I don't think that every person that's running a for-profit business is so insidious where they're conspiring to dupe a bunch of people.
Yeah, no, they're not evil. They're trying to make a living at the end of the day, just because that's the system we're in.
Right, but I do think that there is a severe issue with ignorance, because some people think that, oh, well, they're just being malicious, and it may not be that they're being malicious, it's that they're being completely ignorant, and they really do think that this is doing something, which to me, I used to think differently, but I actually think when you are ignorant of that is worse, and that's exactly how people
that actually that draws the comparison to the YouTube stuff with Boogie there. It's like, yeah, he might not be being malicious, but what he's doing is damaging, whether you are a fan of this person or not. You know, that's the ideas that he's putting out to his audience, to his impressionable audience, because you see that people in the replies, they rely on this guy for their sanity, their mental health. And it's like, okay, it's good if you found something that helps you keep it together in some way, but that's not enough, and it's also not enough to blindly follow this person and enable anything they do just because in the past they have helped you in some way.
Right, and it's very, very difficult for me to just say, okay, well, this person is well-meaning, but it's okay, because a lot of people do things that they think are well-meaning, or they think are...
I mean, that's basically social justice in a nutshell, and everybody can't stand that at this point.
Right, and the problem is, it's like, you can say that about anything. You know, they want to talk, let's sit back, and if we really believe all of the stuff that they say about Trump, well, what's the end game there? Why would somebody be racist, and why would they be sexist? There has to be some reason that they think that, and it's almost always that just instinctive or reactive nature to be protective. You know, if somebody's a racist, it's because, at least when I've had to argue in dumb YouTube comments and other places, it usually comes down to there was an experience that they had in the past, whether it's a big one or small one, doesn't matter. But to them, it's a big deal. They had an experience, it really bothered them, and then they try to look for reasons to to justify it.
And I think to that point, you know, alternatively, you could just turn that right back around, and you know, the people that feel that they face injustice, they've had a bad experience somewhere. You know, maybe it was a big one, maybe it was a small one, but now they think, the system is against me, and it's because of who I am. And, you know, maybe in that instance it was because of that, but that doesn't make it true for the entirety. And I recently, I'm not going to get into, you know, what exactly it was, but I recently saw a video where it was kind of a sit-down conversation, and the people were saying, okay, well, this is just your personal experience, so you can't say that these things are true generally about these people, and they were coming at it from the social justice perspective, but then they turned around and said, well, you have to listen to the experiences of these people to know what you're talking about. So it's like, okay, so does the personal experience matter, or does it not? And I'm of the opinion that it does matter to an extent, but you can't apply it to the entire world, because the world doesn't revolve around you. The world isn't always reflective of where you happen to be.
Right. That does remind me of a job I had about 10 years ago where the owner of it made a racist comment towards me, and the majority of the responses I got to that experience were something close to that, where it basically ended up being, oh, well, you're just being hypersensitive, because apparently I shouldn't be offended that this man's impression of what black people are just a bunch of aggressive thieves and all that. And here we go with the YouTube chat section saying, well, they are, and statistics and all that, and we can all find ways to make data look the way we want to. I can bring up the argument that the majority of men or men are the majority of people that commit crimes, and so what should we do then? Should we banish all men like the
Right.
social
Well,
justice
I
warriors
think if
want?
you are going to accept things like that, then like you said, you have to kind of be consistent about it. And to that, I would say it's like, I don't mind if those things are true. And not in the sense that it makes me feel like superior in some way, in the sense that if those things are true, then there is a reason as to why they're true. And the simple answer is probably not the best answer in those cases, because there are just so many different factors in society. I'm not really willing to accept that just because the majority of men commit crimes or violence or whatever, that it somehow means that it's it's an inherent issue for them to be criminal in some way. So
Right, like they're genetically predisposed.
right.
To
So
be,
I mean, maybe it's an aggression issue because men have higher, hormone levels of testosterone or whatever. Maybe that's true, but that doesn't mean that there aren't men in the world that don't act on those impulses. You're not 100% your environment, and you're not 100% of your genetics. Now, obviously, there are outlying situations where somebody is born mentally retarded, as insensitive as that term is. I don't mean it as an insult. And okay, yeah, then it's like genetics have played a role and given them an unfortunate hand in life, and there's not much environmentally that can be done to help them out. But that's like an outlying situation. The majority of people you come across are not disabled.
yeah, there's a lot of oversimplification in all of this.
Right.
And so
I think
that's kind
that
of the issue. I think the reason is usually simple, but it's not the first. The first reason is not the most precise one. I think looking at things racially is imprecise anyway, because I mean, let's be honest here. There's so much miscegenation over the last several millennia that if you were to look up somebody's genetic makeup, they're not going to be just one race.
Right. Yeah, I think it's pretty rare for someone to be 100% pure. I guess it depends where you live as well. There are obviously places that are more isolated than others. So I don't know. I don't really like to focus too much on those things, because I feel like it gets into an endless cycle of just like justifying extremes, and that's, to me, that happens on both ends of the spectrum. I feel like I come at it from the perspective of, if there is a problem that happens to be true statistically or whatever, the answer is not to bring up those facts as a way to denigrate, but what ideally should happen is finding a way to fix that. Like when people bring up the trans suicide rate, it's like, yeah, okay, that actually is a decent argument as to why you could say it's a mental problem. But simply saying that doesn't really do anything. I agree. I think it is a mental problem, but the answer should be, okay, this is the stat. Why is this happening? What can we do to fix it? Instead of just this blind acceptance of, well, they're oppressed, so we have to protect them. Nobody can say anything bad. And I'm not 100% idealistic here. I don't think, just one sec, I don't think people are inherently good all the time and want to help. I know there's some people that will use those things for bad, but I don't think you can prevent looking into that problem just because some people could use it for bad. And that, I guess that also kind of extends to race stuff or gender stuff, because, like I said, you can take anything and use it for bad. You know, maybe that's kind of just my thing on it.
Well, I mean, case in point, you can take statistics and use them for bad.
Right, and I don't even necessarily, you know, as you know, and I'm sure some people that have listened in the past know, I'm not even a big studies and statistics guy, because I do think it can be very easily warped. But,
well,
you know, there are certain general...
I would go a step further and say it, not that it can be easily warped, it is easily warped.
Okay,
that's fair. The problem with statistics and studies, even the most well-meaning experiments, is that
they're based on the funding or whatever.
That in most cases you don't have the complete sample size. So yes, we have theory that we can try to approximate it, but there's a reason that every study that's published always publishes limitations. That's really an ethical requirement in most cases, that they do that so that they can say, well, we're not making a conclusion because here are the limitations of what we did, and in most cases they use those limitations to go and try to do another study,
right,
and ask for more money so that they can say what they want to say. And I will say to the whole statistics thing is that 20 years ago, when I was growing up, or I was very young, but growing up, you know, in the so-called black community, they would bring up the crime statistics internally to say, okay, you know, there's so many young black men in the so-called black community that are committing so many crimes. Why is this happening? What can we do to fix this? And how we made the leap to social justice.
The answer is not vote Democrat.
Yeah. When we made the leap to social justice, this is where it becomes a problem now in today's climate, because when you can't say that anymore at all, but it used to be if a black person or somebody and so-called ally said it, that was something that was okay to say.
So that actually kind of brings something to mind. I think a lot of this has now become less about solving the problem and more about propping the problem up and kind of, in a snaky way, keeping it alive so that the people that want to profit off of it can. You know, you've got your Sean Kings. A good example, I don't know if I told you about this one. He did something extremely disingenuous, and I think it's really fucked up. He made a post, an old Mexican man was beaten, like, near death or something. And he made a post, of course, on Twitter, photo of the guy. Oh, you know, this is racism, blah, blah, blah. Turns out the person that beat him happened to be a black woman. He deleted the post. No correction, no nothing. Now, look, I understand that there's people out there that will take that and use it for whatever purposes they see fit. Fine. Fair enough. But to hide it makes you look like you have something to hide. I don't think that should be hidden. Somebody committed a crime. Whatever they happen to be, they happen to be. They should be in trouble for it. You want to be an honest news source. You want to report these things. Okay, be honest. Be upfront. That's what happened. You know, life sucks. It's almost like anybody can hate anybody else for any reason.
And
it was racially charged because it was like, go back to Mexico, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
So funny thing about all of that is, in high school, I dated a Mexican woman. So I know all about I know I showed you a Facebook post a while ago where somebody was like, you know, it doesn't matter if we're both oppressed, you know, if we're both minorities. Well, you know, nobody's looking out for each other.
Oh yeah.
You can be gay, but you can still be racist or something like that. But he you know, he's in his 30s and he's just now having this epiphany. And for me, it's like, well, yeah, I realized that when I was like 15 or 16. And so while this is reporting a case of racism on that side, it's like, and people were getting outraged because they're like, oh, well, this was a minority doing this. But it was like, but it can also be the other way around.
Sure.
This whole need to go and want to say, oh, let's go put these people in groups really detracts from the situation. It's like people don't don't like people. And I think my position on uh, people and not trying to fix them. There are two reasons I think they don't. One is because they can't. You,
Oh
it's
yeah, I mean that's a big thing
it
too.
people want to pretend that whatever generation they're in is going to be the generation that fixes millennia, millions of years worth of human development and human tendencies. They're going to just fix that. They're going to fix that in one generation.
Yeah.
No, that's totally realistic. The other reason, one time I went, he wasn't a direct boss of mine, but he was a level above my boss's level. I saw that he had, or I was in school at the time, and I saw that he had gotten a job
Mm-hmm.
at the school. So I went to go to his office sometime later and visit, and just kind of tell him, where I want to go with my career and what I want to do with it, and kind of some of the problems that I was facing getting to that point. How do you get to where you're at, well, now at that point, he became an executive. So he got a promotion from middle management to executive. And so I was saying, it seems really difficult to get there in today's age, especially because everybody wants to take credit for something, especially if it's something they don't know and they know nobody else knows about, which in my case was technology. And he said something to the effect of, when you're working with a place, you go working at a place, you look for the executive, whoever's running the team, and when you're working there, you want to identify the problems, and then you want to do something, then you act on it. And I said, well, yeah, but I've done that plenty of times. I found problems, and then I went and told them, okay, I found this problem, here's the solution. He said, don't do that. The problem when you do that way is that, yes, you brought it up as a problem, but you also brought it as a solution. So it's basically like hey, this thing could have happened, but it didn't happen, and it's never going to happen because I fixed it. So they're never going to look at you and say this is a guy that solves problems, because you basically presented them with a non-issue to them. You fixed it already, so they don't know about it. So he said, you look for a problem, you don't make aware the solution to the problem, you make aware that the problem exists, and then you use that fear of that problem to basically create a team and have the team do whatever you want. And then that's how you play the politics game, to show, okay, this guy can be put in a management position because he created this team to solve a problem. It may be the easiest problem in the world, and you could have solved it on your own in 5 minutes, but you don't want to do that because that the way people think, it's not conducive to you moving ahead if you just go and solve the problem yourself. You want to raise awareness to the problem, and then you want them to give you everything you need to potentially do something about it. Now, the way I see people do things in corporate America, they will drag and milk that problem for as long as they possibly can.
Right.
And in the event they eventually fail, then they just go and jump ship and go to another company, or they try to jump off that train as soon as they can see that nothing is going to go the way that they want it to. And I think people subconsciously probably realize that is reality. Especially if it's like, I think a lot of the social justice warriors were brought up to believe, and even the other side of it, they're brought up to believe that everything is fair, or everything is exact. You do this, you get this in exchange for it. I hear, oh, well, this person was selected. There was an issue in college, or with Trump removing an Obama era suggestion or recommendation on colleges, and people were arguing that, well, he removed it because there was a lawsuit by Asian Americans saying that they were discriminated against in
Right.
college admissions, Ivy League, and Trump apparently sympathized with them and removed it. And one of the things I heard from, of course, the pro-Trump side is that, oh, well, Asians are working and they're more deserving of it. Well, that's a stereotype, and in my experience, it is not true. I'm not going to give in detail why it is now, but I'm going to say that people do cling to this idea that everything is far more meritorious, or you get this and you get this in exchange, and that's how it works in the business world or in the adult world, but it really doesn't.
No,
And
I think it's the ideal.
yeah, and social justice warriors, in addition to the doctrine, to the indoctrination they've gotten about social issues, they also got the same thing about working, which is why you see so many virtue signaling companies now, because they were taught that, you know, if you have you have an issue, they work in these companies, and these guys, they cling to these charismatic leaders that tell them, you know, it's all about how hard you work, it's all about how dedicated you are and how much time you put into something. I think what happens is at some point in time, they probably start realizing that that's not true, and they realize that it's really more insidious than that. That's how you get ahead. And so and realize they don't want to acknowledge that it's true, but they see it, and so that's what they start to realize. Well, then I can get by not doing something, because I saw that it wasn't working hard, or I'm going to copy this person who they say is working hard, even if they're not. And oh, it just so happened that that person that they keep celebrating as working hard is really just bringing a bunch of issues up to the forefront and doing nothing about them. I've gotten praise for doing nothing a few times, where all I did was come to work on a Saturday, and they were singing praises, but it wasn't to do anything significant or important. And that happens a lot, especially in technology, and in the startup world. It's like, it's
that's
not
the
about
hustle,
the work
right?
you do. Yeah, it's not about the work you do. It's about, do you just sit there long enough so that whoever's important sees that you're still there when they're leaving. And they realize that, and so they start applying that whole, oh, I'm not going to do anything about the problem. I'm just going to keep bringing it up, or I'm going to keep doing this to make it look like I'm doing something, or that I'm addressing an issue,
Right.
and then leave it alone.
And that's I guess that's what I feel like a lot of the popular social media figureheads are kind of taking part in. And you know, there is a point that you know, merit is not the end all be all, even if it should be. It's kind of hard to get to that point, just because everybody has their personal biases, and it's not, doesn't necessarily have to be a social justicey type bias. It could be anything. You could not like the way the person dressed, or the way they spoke, or the way they looked at you or didn't look at you. You know, it's a number of things. And I think there is a point to be made that, okay, this is what the system is supposed to be, but it doesn't necessarily work that way. But I also think that the conclusions that they make are not all correct either. So it's more simplifying, I guess.
Well, that's everything is all about simplification anyway, right? All the people that claim that they love science so much, well, what do? They read a couple of Michio Kaku books, or Stephen Hawking, or something like that. You'll never see them go pick up a physics textbook, or something like that, where they can get deeper knowledge, or reading peer-reviewed journal articles. They're just going to read this simple stuff, and then that makes them think that they have some sort of understanding of science that they do not have. And then they go around telling people, and that's how you end up with people saying nonsense like, oh, well, I believe in science. Everybody wants everything kind of simplified, and they want it bite-sized, and that's just the way that's going to be. I don't hate it, and I don't like it either. It just is what it is.
Right.
But if you don't recognize the strategy that people take, then you will be doomed to failure. And I think a lot of the people on the so-called right or conservative side who keep getting frustrated that all these leftists or social justice people are either getting lots of money for doing nothing, or they're continuously getting support in spite of all the scamming they do, are failing to reconcile the reality that it really isn't about doing something. It's about just making enough of a fuss about it to make it look like you are championing a cause. That's why fighting for the that's why saying you're fighting for the cause is more important than
actually working to do it. Yeah.
Fight. Yeah, to figuring out how to fight for it, because it's one of those things, especially with all the virtue signaling. I mean, we all see how easy it is. You say that you support something, you don't really have to do anything. Nobody's really going to do the due diligence to do something. And more often than not, people are just going to look at something. They're going to say, oh, well, this is something that if I support, then that'll make me look like a good person. So I'm just going to like it. And anybody who has any criticism is going to be met with furious
some kind of label or something like that.
Yeah. So then they know that they don't have to do anything because they know that whoever's going to be the dissenter, nobody's going to pay attention to anyway. They're just going to say, oh, well, whatever, you're just contrarian, you're this, you're that, you're whatever. The average person is just going to see something, and much like you have been told, it's a change, and change is inherently good, apparently. And so that means that this is change, and this is something we need to support, because change is good. It doesn't matter what kind of change it is. It's change, and change is good. You either go with the current, with the flow of change, or you get left behind.
So
right?
which could easily be turned around, and that's why I find it to be so stupid. Duncan, Idaho, says merit is a flimsy concept. Raw merit, value in a vacuum, is incredibly hard to pin down or define. Merit usually gets confused with utility.
Right. And to be honest, there's a lot more. Utility is not what people think. It doesn't provide the value necessarily that people think it does when they confuse it with merit. Somebody can be useful, but guess what? That can mean that they're useful in that position that they're in. I've been a victim to that many times, where I've been stuck in a position simply because I was useful in that position,
and then you don't get a chance to move ahead.
Yeah, and if I tried to move ahead, they would try to stop that, because then they can't go and look meritorious. So I'm the useful one, they're the meritorious one. And they say, well, if you go and leave, then I lose the person that's getting all the work done, and I can't have that happen. So I'm going to work diligently to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right. So I think part of the problem here now is that, like you said, the people that realized, okay, maybe it's not all about merit, they're now being told that to the degree of there's no point in even working hard, because you're not going to get ahead. The system is against you. It's rigged. You're screwed. And so I feel like they're the crowd that usually says that, like, words are so damaging, and, they can affect you, traumatize you, and whatnot. I missed the mark on how they reconcile that. Like, how is telling somebody that they're useless, they're never going to get ahead because of the system, how is that not damaging to them to the point where they're not going to try? And I think that happens. So while it's not a good idea to lie to people and say, oh, you'll get what you want as long as you work hard, it's also not valuable to say, well, don't even bother because you're fucked no matter what you do. It's important to encourage a good work ethic, in this, maybe not in the sense of, go to the company, always do your best to kiss their ass, but in the sense of, if you have something that you want to do, just make sure you try to do it to the best of your ability. It doesn't matter if, society necessarily finds you successful. If you're able to at least carve out a living for yourself and your family, that should be enough. You're capable of anything is the most damaging thing you can tell anyone, especially children. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes both ways. If you lie to people and say, oh, you can do anything you want, that's not good. But if you also crush their dreams right away and say, well, don't even bother, that's just as bad. It's just the opposite end. There's kind of it's more important to instill someone with a sense of realism instead of lying and, just, well, either lying or telling them something you actually believe, I guess. I think it's a lie, just because that's not, you look around and you see that's not how it works. But I think it's also, people that have made it places, they do like to believe, they do like to romanticize it and kind of believe that it's all them and nothing else. Now, I'm not saying nobody is, self-made or builds themselves up from a bad spot, but a lot of the times when I read those stories of people that say those things, it doesn't feel like they're the ones that were the truly more self-made ones. It always seems like the article is filled with like stupid cliches rather than a sense of reality.
Yeah, there are a lot of people. I mean, people who do they worship now? Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and all that. They're not self-made by any means. Certainly not Jeff Bezos. He came from a very well-to-do family, and
Well,
yeah,
they like to show that image of early Amazon where it's just like a desk and a pile of boxes.
yeah, and it's like, oh well, he was working Christmas Day or something like that, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, that may be the case. That may all be true, but it is. Those are also things that business owners like to do to make themselves feel good, to say, hey, I worked hard and that's why I got successful. And just in not understanding that that may not be how they got successful. Because I've known about Amazon since 96 or 97.
Right.
So since I was very young, I've known about Amazon. I came
That
from
was just a bookstore back then, wasn't it?
yeah, I mean, I came from a family that's worked in technology since for big tech companies for decades. So I know about them and I knew about them then, but it does people a disservice to just simply say, well, because he did X, Y, and Z. There's a whole lot of looking at correlation and then saying and confusing that with causation. Well, the people that have successful businesses did this and this and this. There, you hear a lot of people saying, "Hey, don't go into debt." Let's use that as an example. Don't go into debt. Bootstrap everything. Do everything with your own money. Well, if you look at the richest person in history right now, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, he took out lots of loans,
Right.
lots of what he considered small loans. But there's also another side to that. He also worked for, I believe he was an investment banker or something like that. He worked on Wall Street, and that has a lot to do with how things work. He knows how to deal with investors, so it's a lot easier for him to go and say, hey, I'm going to do this. It's not going to you're not going to see a return on it. You're not going to see any immediate value on it, but this is good. Trust me. And they'll believe it because he knows how to work with those people are investors, the board of directors and all that. They're investors. So he knows how to work with these people and he knows how to talk them into believing what it is that he says. It's not so simple as just, oh, well, he just figured it out. They would do that of Henry Ford.
Well, right. I don't like the implication that there is a tried and true formula, because you can apply it and it doesn't work, and then it's like, okay, well, why didn't it work? And Duncan says, I hope I'm not alone here in admitting I've worked hard and got fucked. I've worked less hard and got rewarded, and everything in between. When you're successful, it's a mix, not a single ingredient. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, because you can't really just narrow it down to one singular thing. He had the connections and experience to maximize his individual merits. Yeah, I mean, look, connections are a big part of it when it comes to businesses. That's
why so many of those social justice people whine about privilege, which is ironic because they have access to these same people. But they whine about privilege because they say, okay, well, when you're dealing with something that's personal and it's not based on merit, you can then run into a situation where somebody who may be wealthy and willing to invest in something says, I don't want to invest in that person because she's a woman, or I don't want to invest in this person because he's black, or because of this. I don't really see anybody doing anything based on sexual orientation, because unless you go around with a
and
big
like
pride
broadcast
flag,
it, or maybe you float into the room.
Right. They won't know and they won't care.
Yeah.
So in that case, I don't think it applies as much, but
yeah, I mean, I guess the transgender thing would be an issue because there's many that don't pass. So that could probably be the only one that maybe you could make that argument for.
And I think that is really just like all the other things they're less rational. That's probably an appearance thing. They could probably make leaps and say, well, if somebody looks like that and they're willing to do that to themselves, they probably don't. They're probably not very emotionally mature. They're not somebody. They seem more of a liability than anything, because they can't even be comfortable in the gender that they're in. or that they were assigned at birth. And so if they aren't comfortable there, then how stable could they ever be as as a leader of a company? Why
Right.
would I give them my money? I don't know what they're gonna do with it. At that point, you really have to work on track record. But like I said, track record is still something people use to say, oh well, that's merit. And even after all of that, they can still say, well, I just don't like the person. I don't
Yeah.
want I
I
don't want to get
mean,
involved.
realistically, everybody uses the term discrimination and then just kind of says it as though it's automatically an inherently bad thing. But to some degree, I mean, discrimination has its utilities. Like, okay, we can argue that some types are bad, and I agree with that. There are some types that are bad, but at some point, somewhere, you have to discriminate to make a choice. Um, Unfortunately, like when it comes to people that may have the same amount of experience, obviously it's probably going to come down to just whoever the guy in charge likes better. I don't really, as much as I can say, okay, well maybe that's unfair to the other person because they were equal in experience. I don't really know of another way that they could overcome that other than like making two positions so both people are happy.
Right. And
That's a hard
there,
thing.
I mean, it's a risk either way, and people just don't want to accept that there's a probability of success and failure for any decision that somebody makes. And so that means that somebody oftentimes will never be happy. But what I will say, at least as it pertains to the so-called Black experience, I think that has led to a contingent of people who have become entitled, because in the days of, say, segregation, which Jim Crow, it certainly wasn't good, but there were certainly benefits that came from that in so far as there are certain things that people in that community say that they wish we had more of.
So I've also heard, like, I've never really looked too much into myself because I just don't do that sort of thing. But I also heard like the family unit structures were better. There
Yeah,
wasn't as much separation and whatnot. I don't know if that was true across the board. I think it was just true across the board for everybody.
I think that was true just in general.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know 100% that you could narrow it down to one specific thing. I think there's a lot of things that have come to break relationships down between people. But
I mean, I would imagine it still wasn't that great in the Black community. It was probably better than it is now, to an extent. Well, it depends. I think in middle class scenarios, probably not as much. It's probably improved. But back then, I think the reason that it's probably never been so good is probably because, to be quite honest, there's a legacy of being adjusted to being separated from your families, because yeah, as much as people want to complain about being separated now, when people approach the border and either claim asylum or do so illegally, they in the days of slavery they were separated and nobody bats an eyelash to that. And I think the long-term effects of that is that it was more commonplace, or it was normalized to simply just be separated. And wow, the effects of normalization aren't always positive, I guess. That's my guess
right.
on that. I don't know if it's true.
I guess the entitlement thing. I think the thing that bothers me about that is like, okay, sure, society's not perfect, but this is really the so-called best time in our history to quote unquote be who you are, because there are so many things now that no matter how ridiculous they are that are like blindly accepted. So yeah, all right, maybe sometimes in your life you encounter crappy situations. Okay, that sucks. So do I. But I don't like this. I take on the hardships of my ancestors just in the same way that I take on the accomplishments of my ancestors, even if I'm not related to them in any way. It's like you are, at that point, you're kind of, even if you have some bad experiences that maybe you could kind of draw similarities between, you're still piggybacking off of somebody else's struggle, and I don't feel like you have the right to do that just because you know, share a racial background. I can understand feeling bad for like family members that are still alive that had to deal with that kind of thing, but to be like, I have the same sort of thing, it just seems pretty ungrateful in a sense. And I'm like, I don't want to say it that way just because, again, I don't think society is perfect. I have a lot of problems with it, but it seems like trying to capitalize on something.
Well, the reason I say I feel there's entitlement is because at least back before all of that, before you had integration, I believe when people are most limited, that's when they can become creative when it comes to starting a business. That's when they can be
So
the most resourceful
this
in
this
creating
is kind of
something.
a funny parallel to draw, but I feel the same way about video games. Like, you compare old Final Fantasy to new Final Fantasy, just the confines of the graphics and the way that they would portray cutscenes back then, where it's like there's imagination to there's like an element of imagination to kind of infer what's happening on the screen, but now it's just like it's a movie and you can watch every little thing and it's all clear for you on what exactly is going on. So
Yeah,
it lacks creativity in the sense that it holds your hand completely.
yeah, and I think that is exactly what's happened is that you have more happening, and so now people are now they're saying, well, back in those days you didn't have opportunity, so there was somebody out there who might have been enterprising enough to say, well, I'll start a business. One example I had a professor once mentioned back in Jim Crow era. We all know that there's yellow cab. And so in the days when it was segregated, there was black cab that would go and pick people up from the airport where I lived and drive them to their side of town. And then, of course, when you had integration, well, everybody can just go anywhere. And there were less people willing to be enterprising. And so now it's gotten to a point like I, you didn't hear much growing up about, in my case, either about managing money well, about about starting a business. It was always about do this thing so you can get this. It was always looking at the outcome, and that's not just a black thing. I know plenty of people. That's you do hear that type of mentality all across the board, which is why there's so few people that start businesses. But it seems to have had more of a pronounced effect where I say it leads to entitlement because rather than saying, hey, if you can't get something, then make it.
Right.
It
Yeah.
doesn't, it may be difficult, but if you're having that problem, chances are somebody else is having that problem, and you guys can work together to create something, and you may be able to get to be successful enough to where
Well,
you don't have to worry about that anymore.
yeah, I mean, I think that's good for multiple reasons, and one of them being is like in the process, you know, you're learning a skill, you're learning something you didn't know before. So even if your first endeavor fails, you still come out of it with some sort of new knowledge that maybe you could apply somewhere else.
Yeah, but now it's just, oh well, I was told that if I go to college, this is probably a generational thing too.
Yeah.
And I go to college and I study this. I remember a big thing when I was just starting college was the big things that what we were told we should study should either be medicine, so being a doctor, or business, because with an MBA or business degree, you can become a manager, and that shows that we've climbed the social ladder and that we are able to really fit in better. So that's what you should go after, and so now it's probably changed to more. You have more STEM because STEM is popular now. But that's what you had back then, and so then of course then you have people that with that expectation that well I go and I do this and then I can go and get a job and I'll make lots of money and then I will have climbed the social ladder. But doing those things, going to college in general for the express output of a job is ridiculous to begin with. And so so that's where I think people get entitled, because because now you have things open up, and now it's easier to climb the social ladder, because apparently those people that started all those black businesses before didn't climb the social ladder because we were still separated, and now everything is open so everybody can do anything. And then you have all these people go to school, when they do all of that and then they don't get the job they expected, many of them say, well, okay, I was supposed to get one. And I bet you the reason I didn't get one is because of this straight white male over here.
Right.
Because his dad probably hangs out at the country club with that guy who does the hiring, when in most cases that's not true. It's only if you're really high up there where that probably happens. Otherwise, it's not like that at all. The average person that everybody claims that discriminates them against the job is a person who is, I mean, let's be honest, they're usually very selfish. They find anybody, they hire with the mentality that anybody they talk to is a threat, is either a threat to them, or they're going to cause them some kind of grief or trouble. So, the discrimination thing may factor into that, where that may be how they justify in their head that, oh, that person was black and I didn't want to hire them. But I still think the entitlement is just ridiculous, because barring that scenario, it really comes down to that person wants somebody who's good enough in the sense that they can be told what to do, and they can be a yes man to whatever that person wants and doesn't challenge them, but can also always stay underneath them.
Right.
So it doesn't try to go above them.
So I guess one thing I don't like about the the whole diversity thing is that it gets to a point where it starts to punish people that may not even be guilty of whatever the accusation is in the first place. I mean, you can't just, in the same way you can't take away somebody's job because they're black, you can't just go and take away somebody's job because they're white and you assume that if they weren't there, that would be your position. I mean, it's not yours to claim. It's like, it's insanity. You can't just punish innocent people.
Right. You're not entitled to a job.
Like it sucks. I mean, yeah, it's hard to find good work. It's hard to find a good job where you can actually, move up and be successful. But you can't just go taking things away from everybody because you feel like other people have more. Does it suck sometimes that other people have more? Sure. Maybe they don't deserve it? Sure. But you still, in the end, you can't do that, because you can't just assume that they have it for those reasons. I think we've kind of covered our bases on this topic. So we've been going for like an hour and 40, so I am going to wrap up. But if you have anything final to add, that's fine too.
Jerry's final thoughts.
No, take care of yourself and each other.
My position as on a lot of things are simply that, in many cases, to me, it is what it is. I think human nature is a very difficult thing to change. So
sure,
while the symptom may be discrimination, or the symptom may be this, the ultimate problem is human nature, and people are going to be inclined to whatever they think is going to lead them to survival. However they view survival, that's what they're going to lean towards, and nothing else, above all else. So while there are a lot of social ills and social problems, I think that human nature makes it hard to solve a lot of these issues, because the real problem is that when it comes to survival, you're usually not being that altruistic. You're not looking in terms of everybody else. You're looking at yourself. And if you claim to be an altruist, you may use that as ammunition. But I feel it's a learned behavior to be altruistic more than not, with few exceptions. And so while I do agree with a lot of what some people say, who are very much against social justice or just critics of it, I agree with most of what they say. There's also some nugget of truth to what I do hear from the social justice side, insofar as human nature has led to some things happening, and we can't pretend that doesn't exist. But I think the extreme to which they go and say that this is a conspiracy of sorts, I think can be better explained with people simply being ignorant or just being absent. You know, they're just stupid. They're not malicious as much as they are stupid.
Right. Duncan says, thanks for the stream, guys. It was a pleasant distraction from the workday. You're welcome. Thanks for joining. It's appreciated. I guess my closeout will just be, it kind of boils, for me, it kind of boils down to what I said earlier, that, you know, I think you're onto something there with the whole human nature bit. So I would just say that even though it's impossible to eradicate completely, and I've always kind of thought that, the best thing you can do is go by the whole lead by example thing, because then at the very least you are you're changing yourself, and you're also actively encouraging other people to you know, maybe they'll see something that resonates with the way you behave, and as a result they will change for the better as well. So I guess that's where I'm at. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you for taking part in the chat. All the support is appreciated, and I'll see you before too long. Thanks.